Breaking news overnight, new questions about Boeing.
We turn now to Boeing.
Boeing CEO says the company is, quote, acknowledging its mistake.
Should this plane have ever been in the air?
We all know that Boeing right now are in desperate need to try to get their house back in order, and at the same time their current finances mean that they're really struggling to compete with Airbus, both in terms of sales and in designing new aircraft. But is it possible that Airbus somehow might be trying to help Boeing back on their feet, or is there something else going on? Stay tuned. Over the past few weeks, I've tried to keep you guys up to date with every new chapter in Boeing's latest 737 MAX crisis. This has included the wider implications that these developments have had on Boeing themselves, but also on one of their key suppliers, Spirit AeroSystems. In fact, if we look back, we can see that Spirit has actually been featuring in 737 MAX stories for almost a year now due to various quality problems which has been slowing down its production. Now, Spirit's main facility in Wichita, Kansas used to previously be known as Boeing Wichita, where it has actually been part of Boeing's history since before the Second World War. And to this day, workers there are making parts for basically every jet that Boeing are producing. But back in 2005, the ownership of this hugely important site suddenly changed.
Folks in Wichita say Boeing double-crossed them when it suddenly announced plans to shut down the factory.
And that was because Boeing had then decided to sell this and also some other aerostructure operations off in really a controversial move aimed at allowing them to concentrate on their core activities. You see, the management back then had decided that the company's core activities was not building aircraft structures. No, instead, that was designing and assembling aircraft. So what they did was that they ended up subcontracting out the actual construction to the likes of Spirit AeroSystems instead. Now, this was to most observers a bizarre decision to take, and it had a lot to do with the sort of financial indicators that Boeing's management had become obsessed with after their merger with McDonnell Douglas in the late 1990s.
I gotta tell you one thing, this is one neat company. It is made up of fantastic people. We are going to knock the world on its ear.
But it seems like Boeing's current management have now come to realize that getting rid of what is now Spirit was an enormous mistake. And in the wake of the huge amount of problems that Spirit has faced over the last few years, it has caused quite a few analysts to start asking, would it be possible for Boeing to maybe reacquire Spirit? In that case, what would then be the potential benefits of that, and would they even be realistic? Now, we will get to those questions shortly, but early last year, when people like John Ostrower at the Air Current brought this possibility up, these questions seemed almost academic. And that was because even though Boeing's management had understood how big of a mistake it was to sell Boeing Wichita in the first place, that didn't mean that this could be suddenly just reversed overnight. Boeing would need a lot of funds to buy back Spirit, and motivating a purchase like that at a time when they were already bleeding a lot of money seemed, well, basically unthinkable. During the preceding 4 or 5 years, Boeing had taken on a lot of financial hits, including obviously from the Boeing 737 MAX program, but then also the 787, the still uncertified Boeing 777X, and even military programs like the KC-46 Alpha tanker and the T-7 Alpha trainer. This basically meant that Boeing's debt at the end of last year, even before the MAX 9 blowout happened, was sitting at around $36 billion. And obviously, purchasing Spirit would only push this debt further up. And on top of that, this would be only months after Boeing's management had promised their investors a better financial outlook within a 2 to 3 year time frame.
I'm confident on the liquidity front. Cash flow is getting better every quarter.
The value of Spirit's traded stocks, most of which Boeing would be needing to buy in order to go through with this merger, is currently sitting at around $3.3 billion. But on top of that, Boeing would also need to take on most of Spirit's debt, pushing up its own debt even further. Now, as I'm filming this, Boeing are still saying that their goal is to have $10 billion in free cash flow by 2025 or 2026. And that goal might explain why, in a press conference last summer, Boeing CEO Dave Calhoun dismissed the idea of reacquiring Spirit completely. He did accept that there were certainly some problems there, but he said that he didn't think that acquiring Spirit would be the way to solve them. And yet, on the 1st of March 2024, a story broke out that Boeing and Spirit were actually in talks to discuss bringing back the Wichita operation under Boeing's wings. And just a few hours later, both Boeing and Spirit did announce that these rumors were indeed true, even though they both emphasized that the deal was far from certain. These news obviously caused Spirit's share price to shoot up and Boeing's shares to equally drop down, which makes sense based on those financial targets that Boeing had previously been announcing. So why would Boeing even want to pursue something like that if it would hurt them that much financially? Well, one reason would be because it would send a really strong message. There have been some suggestions that the current quality issues have been, at least in part, caused by the working relationship between Boeing and Spirit. So to actually buy them completely would be a big gesture to show that Boeing are serious about fixing those quality issues once and for all. The door plug blowout, which happened on Alaska Airlines flight 1282, really brought the attention of both the world and of course also the regulators onto these quality issues. So extreme measures will have to be taken. In a recent video that I did about this incident over on the Mentour Pilot channel, I talked about how Spirit AeroSystems used contracted employees at Boeing's 737 facility at Renton to fix any problems with parts that had escaped their factory in Wichita. That would basically be warranty work from the supplier Spirit to the customer Boeing. A whistleblower from the Renton factory explained that the working relationship between the workers of these two companies were, well, how do you put it, somewhat difficult. But Spirit only has workers there because of this need to do warranty work. So if the two companies would be merged, these problems probably wouldn't go away completely, but they would likely get a lot simpler to manage. On top of that, Boeing then wouldn't need to send armies of people down to Spirit's factory in Wichita every few months to fix things, as they say that they have been doing recently. So that is basically the second reason why Boeing would want Spirit to become Boeing Wichita again. The purchase would give Boeing more direct control over a critical part of their supply chain, since the idea that Spirit's work isn't a core part of Boeing has been, well, pretty much debunked by now. So basically, what this all seemed to mean is that right now might actually be the perfect time for Boeing to buy Spirit. They will be able to motivate that move to the FAA and to other regulators and stakeholders looking closely at what they're doing at the moment. And also, they will be able to justify it to their investors as a necessary move, both to satisfy those regulators and for the long-term stability of the company. And this is something that they wouldn't have been able to do just a few months back. But there are still some serious problems here, because the Spirit AeroSystems of today is not the same as the company and facility that Boeing spun off back in 2005. And this is finally where Airbus comes into this story. And I will explain to you how they fit in here and how they would actually be able to help Boeing pick up Spirit, if that is actually what they're doing, after this. Breaking the Airbus-Boeing duopoly is going to be a really hard thing to do. It will require rising to enormous challenges and really pushing the envelope on what's possible. And as someone who likes taking on a big challenge, I'm super excited to introduce you to today's sponsor, Copilot Fitness. With my super busy schedule, I've always found it very hard to find time to work out. And when I actually do get myself to the gym, I always end up doing the very same exercises over and over again with no real target or plan. Because of that, Copilot Fitness has been a real blessing, since they have now provided me with a real personal trainer from my iPhone. My instructor, Rod, reminds me when it's time to train, and he also has set up a training program just for me using the equipment that I have available at home, on the go, or when I'm hitting the gym. And Rod is not just some virtual coach either. Copilot Fitness always sets you up with a real person, which you can then have video calls with, text questions to, and who will check up on your progress and tailor-make each one of your sessions.
I wrote down for your goals is again weight loss. You want to lose about 5 kilos, and I also added in mobility because it's different, but at the same time, I think both of them are very beneficial. Sound good to you?
Sounds good to me. Right now, if you see me, I look like a 75-year-old grandpa. All you need to get started is your iPhone, but if you also have an Apple iWatch, it's even better, since it will feed important data into the app, which your trainer can then use to analyze your progress. I have only been using Copilot Fitness for a few weeks so far, but I've already noticed great progress. It's just different when you have someone looking after you. So if you are interested in trying them out, then click on the link here below, which is go.mycopilot.com/mentor now, or scan this QR code. That will give you 14 days of free workout with your own fitness trainer, and trust me, you won't regret it. Thank you, Copilot Fitness. Now back to the video. Now, at a first glance, you might look at the way that Airbus builds their aircraft and think that their supply chain is even more complicated than Boeing's. While Boeing assembles their 787 from parts made by companies in Italy, Japan and the United States, that's actually the exception of the rule. Boeing's other jets are basically built only at their own sites. But if you, on the other hand, look at Airbus, they make all of their planes from parts made in Spain, France, Germany, Britain, Italy and even more countries than that. And they then assemble those planes in France, in Germany, in the United States and even in China. And after they bought the Airbus A220, well, then they had to add even more countries to that list, but I'll get back to that. However, one big difference between Airbus and Boeing is that Airbus actually owns most of the facilities who builds their wings, fuselages and other key parts of their aircraft. So even though their manufacturing might look more complicated, the company also have a more direct control over all of those operations. This means that Airbus also have a cost advantage over Boeing, since Boeing's suppliers have to earn a profit on the aerostructures that they supply, although this has been a bit of a sore point with several of Boeing's suppliers complaining that Boeing's aggressive pricing meant that they can barely break even. But anyway, in the years after it became an independent company, Spirit expanded and invested heavily by acquiring a number of other key aerostructures companies and facilities around the world. That meant that they quickly also became an Airbus supplier, since diversifying their customer base seemed like a pretty sound idea to do. So let's have a quick look at what Spirit actually makes for Airbus at the moment and also where they're making it. Let's start in Prestwick, Scotland, which is a facility that used to be the site of BAE Systems Aerostructures. Today, this site is called Spirit Aerosystems Europe Limited, and it makes components for the leading and trailing edges of the wings of the Airbus A320 family. And they also used to make the slats and other wing components for the Airbus A380 when that was still in production. Then there's a site called Spirit Aerosystems France, located in Saint-Nazaire, which assembles large composite fuselage structures for the Airbus A350. And some of those composite panels actually come from another Spirit facility in Kinston, North Carolina, United States. And finally, there is Spirit Aerosystems Belfast in Northern Ireland. This is the old site of Short Brothers plc, which actually remains its legal name today. Before Spirit acquired the company back in 2020, it had belonged to Bombardier in Canada, and even after Spirit's purchase, the Belfast site still makes aircraft structures, including fuselages for several of Bombardier's business jets, as well as various other aircraft components for various other customers worldwide. But more crucially for this story, the Belfast site is also where the composite wings of the Airbus A220 are made, along with the mid-fuselage section and other smaller parts of that same aircraft, making this site really crucial for Airbus. Oh, and before I forget, in the comments of several of my previous videos, quite a few of you have asked, if Spirit is so terrible and they're making parts for both Boeing and Airbus, how come that we haven't heard of any quality complaints from Airbus? Now that's a fair question, and the answer to that is that I don't really know, but part of it, or anyway a clue, might have to do with the fact that, as far as I know anyway, Spirit doesn't produce major components for Airbus and Boeing at the same production sites. Now feel free to comment below if you think that I'm wrong about this, and while you're there, hit the like and subscribe buttons please. Go on. Anyway, this separation of production sites is quite relevant here, because it might also help us answer our next and by now pretty obvious question. what will happen to these Airbus production sites if Boeing and Spirit AeroSystems go ahead and merge? Well, here I will have to speculate a little bit, which I quite enjoy on this channel. It's probably safe to say that because of the financial situation, which I've already pointed out, Boeing would want to keep the cost of this purchase to an absolute minimum. So that would likely indicate that they really wouldn't want to buy any Spirit operations that aren't making Boeing parts. Similarly, I also think it's reasonable to assume that Airbus wouldn't be exactly thrilled if Boeing suddenly got control of production sites that make key Airbus components. So, what's the way out of this then? Well, when the story broke that Boeing and Spirit were discussing a possible remarriage, there were also news that Airbus was exploring the possibility of purchasing Spirit's A220 wing and fuselage facility in Belfast. And this brings us to the tantalizing prospect of Boeing and Airbus basically carving out and splitting Spirit, so they each get the bits that they are interested in. But as always, things are not as straightforward as they first might seem. Firstly, as I've already mentioned, there are more companies involved here than just Boeing and Airbus. I have already mentioned Bombardier, but Spirit also makes parts and structures for military contractors like Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Secondly, Spirit also has an aftermarket arm selling spare parts to airlines, which is an activity that has actually caused them to clash with Boeing in the past. But why would Airbus help this process along? Why would they actually spend money of their own to help Boeing sort out their quality and supply chain problems when things seems to be going quite well for them as it is? Well, the answer is that Airbus actually does have some of their own problems to sort out. One reason why Airbus would probably want to buy the A220 wing plant in Belfast, aside from the fairly remote danger of Boeing snatching it up, is because the A220 is currently the only Airbus jet whose wing isn't made by Airbus themselves. The wings of all of the other Airbus airliners are made by Airbus UK at its site in Broughton, which traces its origins all the way back to Hawker Siddeley in the 1930s. But obviously, the production and supply network of the original C-series was already set up by Bombardier, so there was really no way to make drastic changes to it when Airbus took the program over. But streamlining the supply chain of the Airbus A220 is a headache that Airbus have been trying to sort out ever since they got hold of the aircraft. This jet first entered service in 2016, then still owned by Bombardier, but to this day, about 7.5 years later, it still isn't profitable. And that brings us to a serious issue, because it turns out that Airbus actually has some loose ends with Spirit AeroSystems. For several months now, the two companies have been locked in negotiations regarding the price of the A220 wings, as well as other parts which Spirit makes for Airbus. Spirit want higher prices for its supplied parts to boost their troubled finances. And in the case of Boeing, Spirit actually did manage to negotiate their prices up a little bit in October last year, just before the latest debacle. But Airbus will take a little bit more convincing here, because they are trying to make the A220 profitable, and that would mean reducing production costs, not increasing them. At the moment though, Spirit are reportedly making those A220 wings at a loss, which obviously isn't sustainable. And according to Dominic Gates, the same seems to also be true for all Airbus A350 parts that Spirit are delivering, so you can see why it would be hard for Spirit and Airbus to possibly see eye to eye here. On the other hand, it's also hard to imagine Airbus letting someone else manage the production of its parts, especially since they have been trying to exert more control over their supply chain for quite some time already. Remember, safeguarding the quality of parts and its supply chain is the very reason why Boeing is seriously thinking of buying back Spirit. So with that lesson clearly on display, it's likely that Airbus will try to avoid making that same mistake themselves, especially with something as critical as the A220 wing. Now in theory, if Airbus isn't prepared to buy the Belfast wing plant at any price, Boeing could simply buy Spirit's sites at Wichita plus any other sites that might be producing Boeing components. They could then leave the rest of Spirit's sites to continue to operate as Spirit. A much smaller Spirit obviously, which would still be making things for Airbus, Lockheed Martin and Northrop Grumman. But the question is, would that satisfy Airbus? Would they be happy with such a small company having responsibility for the A220 wing? This is very likely a high-stakes negotiation that will be worth keeping a very close eye on over the next few weeks and months. But to be perfectly honest here, even though it's really interesting, the Airbus side of this story isn't really the most important aspect of this story. That is instead obviously Boeing's move on Spirit. I've explained before on this channel that Boeing doesn't survive without Spirit, and Spirit doesn't survive without Boeing. But the question is this same true for Airbus? Will Airbus actually help maintain this delicate balance, or could they have other plans as they plan for the expansion of production of the Airbus A220, for example? Remember, that is the newest aircraft in the Airbus lineup and almost certainly the key in any new single-aisle variant that Airbus will be bringing to market over the next decade. And because of that, they must make it profitable if their long-term plan is for a stretched version that can take over the market from both the Airbus A320 and the Boeing 737 MAX. So theoretically, by helping Boeing in the short term by minimizing the price that they will have to pay to buy back their Wichita plant, Airbus could actually be making a move that will ultimately deliver a decisive blow to Boeing towards the end of this decade. What do you guys think? Are Airbus playing some serious three-dimensional chess here, or is there something else going on? Let me know in the comments here below. I love hearing from you. And also, please subscribe to the channel if you think that I've earned it, and go and check out mentorpilot.com or my app, Mentor Pilot, which is available on both app stores if you want the latest aviation news. Have an absolutely fantastic day. Check out these videos next, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.